Good afternoon. This is David Whitaker with the Georgia Employers Association, and I would like to welcome you to the webinar, Retaining and Hiring the Best When the Applicant Pool Gets Shallow. In the first webinar on February the 10th, we provided tips and techniques on how to hire smarter in 2015. With the unemployment rate dropping to its lowest level in several years, the applicant pool, as y'all probably know, is down, and you will be hard-pressed to hire the candidate who is the right fit for the job. In today's webinar, Ira Wolfe with Success Performance Solutions will review several additional tools that are available to you. He will cover the Assess, Selection, and Development System targeted to management, sales, and other key positions. Assess is both personality and competency-based, and Ira will show companies how to customize a report based on job-specific requirements. Some of you may have heard of Ira before. He's a recognized thought leader and author about workforce trends and employee assessment. He writes and speaks about the convergence of increasing job skills requirements, changing demographics, accelerating changes in technology and globalization, which is creating unprecedented staffing changes. Also, the partner of GEA. A couple of housekeeping issues. The lines are muted, but you can type in your questions, and Ira will answer them at the end of the webinar. Also, we can unmute your phone at the end of the webinar if you would like to verbalize your question instead of typing it. Ira, I'm going to turn it over to you. And by the way, tell us how the weather is in Pennsylvania.
Okay. Hey, thanks very much, David. And the weather today, at least we got a beautiful blue sky, but it's about single digits outside and a little bit of windy, but surrounded by a lot of white snow yet, and it's going to be pretty bitter for the next few days. So, a little colder than you down there. It's a pleasure to be back, David. I know we've done a series of webinars and had an opportunity to work with some of the members, and hopefully this will incite a few other people to look into improving how they recruit and also screen and select employees. Focus today will be on Assess, although we're going to talk about some preliminary things, a little bit about the background. I want to leave some time for questions. I'll stop a few times, maybe probably twice during the presentation to answer any questions that are out there. And please, for everybody listening, please enter your questions in the chat area, and we'll make sure to address them as well. Okay. So let's get started here without any further ado. For most of you, you'll well recognize that the market is certainly changing. It's changed dramatically over the last 7 years, especially since the Great Recession. But it's been gradually, it's been changing really for the last 30 or 40 years. I write a lot about this. I speak a lot about it. But the definition of work is changing. We're dealing with changing demographics, aging populations, shifting businesses, changing business climate, globalization, you name it, there's something going on. And yet many businesses, especially smaller businesses, continue to use processes and techniques that used to work pretty well in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and maybe even gotten away with it in the early 2000s, but are now starting to break down. Right before we got on the call, I was sharing an instance with David was about one of my clients, a small appliance and kitchen remodeler in Pennsylvania, and they recruited me. We don't do recruitment, but they retained me to help them identify some sources for finding an appliance salesperson. So it's a reasonably good paying job. It's a good company, very profitable. And in the past, up until recently, when we've been retained to do something like that, we really got flooded with applications. And for a small business, if you get 50 or 60 or even 100 or so, which has been the case, that's been we were able to help screen out the people that they shouldn't have considered and help them hire the best of who applied. We started this process about 2.5 weeks ago, and we've been using multiple job boards. Usually we use Indeed or Simply Hired, which is something that I'd suggest today. Indeed is becoming probably one of the pioneers and the most prolific, because it functions like Google for those who don't understand how Indeed works compared to, let's say, a Monster or a Career Builder. Indeed really kind of scrapes the internet like Google does for content. So any type, there's jobs available out there, and they partner with many of the other job boards like Career Builder and Monster. I'm not sure which ones they're partnering with right now, but those ads will show up on their boards too. That's certainly been, a change in the way that things have gone and been very successful. But we used Indeed, simply hired. We weren't getting the quality that we wanted or the quantity. And so we did resort to Career Builder, and that wasn't as successful as we thought it would be, and went to Monster and went to even a local newspaper. And fortunately, we did attract a handful of quality people, but the volume just wasn't there, which is kind of a long way to get to my point. It's changing. Even 6 months ago, but certainly a year or two ago, we would have been inundated with applications. Because of the struggle, I reached out to some of my colleagues who are recruiters and staffing agencies to ask if they might be able to give some help or make some referrals, or even for my clients to retain them, and they're experiencing the same challenges. Some of these challenges may be geographic, but there's certainly they're certainly nationwide, and they're much worse in certain industries and certain other geographies. As you can see on the right here, where we have this funnel, where our skill is, where Success Performance Solutions, helps organizations, is helping. One is helping you get a little bit more people to the top of the funnel, but also making sure that the people who come out the bottom are the right people, and that's really what ASSESS Systems does, and that's what our PeopleClues system does, which we talked about last week, and I'll just quickly address that in a few minutes here, how that works. But the goal will be, in today's market, of how do you identify quality people? And again, we're really experts at helping inside that funnel. But outside the funnel's changed. As I mentioned with that appliance store, or my appliance client, the struggle is they have no social media presence, and that's becoming more and more and more relevant. It's not that you have to, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn or YouTube or Pinterest or Instagram, it's not which tool you use, but it's the ability to create a network, and when you have a job opening, for people for you to have access to a media that allows people to find out about that opportunity and find out what it's like to work for your company. So we do help with that. That's not necessarily the total focus, but we said we were going to address that, of how to source better, especially using new technologies, including social media, how to attract millennials, and there's a new generation out there, if you're not aware, it's called Generation Z. Recently wrote an article on that. I'd be happy to send the link, or David can send the link to everybody who's on the call. But at the same time, while we're trying to do Generation Y, Generation Z, we got the Generation X, we got the baby boomers, and we have some some of the older workers as well, which many different names for them, but veterans or traditionalists. So we essentially have 5 generations in the workplace, and they're all using different forms of media to find out how to get there. So once you do attract somebody, or whether you're looking internally, and a lot of our work is growing in the area of assessing existing talent, especially for leadership and sales role or other key positions, is the use of assessments. Before we get there, I thought this was again, the slides are available, and David will be able to forward those to you, a link right after our session if he's not done so already. But in hard-to-fill jobs, I think this is critical, because the trend is moving upwards. Many of these positions used to be very easy to fill, short time. If you had an opening, you can likely have it filled within a few days. And the time to fill and the difficulty in filling those positions is getting higher. And just recently, the wages have started to go up too because of the competition. But in any type of manufacturing or distribution or sales environment, and healthcare as well, you're going to notice that many of the positions that you're looking for are in this upper right grid, which carry a higher price, higher wage, but they're also taking longer to fill. They're much higher. So we're seeing this trend moving up to the right here, and with that implication is the cost of making a hiring mistake with somebody making minimum wage or $10 or $12 an hour or even $15, there certainly is cost associated with that. But when you're starting to hire people that are making $80,000, $100,000, even $60,000 annually, the cost of making a mistake in those areas is just huge, and I can provide some statistics there. But this is kind of an interesting map of where things are going. The other thing that's going on is also a credentials gap. It's called up-credentialing. I just wrote, again, a few articles about that. Happy to share those with anyone. But the minimum requirements has gone up over time. Sometimes justified, sometimes not. And what I mean by that is many more positions are requiring some type of post-secondary degree, at least an associate degree, if not a bachelor's. And even in a role as an executive assistant or executive secretary, the current job holder is 19%. This is from Burning Glass Technologies. It's just a report that literally just came out in the last week or two. 19% of current secretaries and assistants hold a bachelor's, and yet of all the job postings that are out there, 65% are requiring that. So that's called up-credentialing, and whether that's justified, whether holding a bachelor's degree makes a candidate more qualified or not is up for question, and we're going to address that issue shortly. But certainly it's creating a credentials gap out there as well. So it's good if you raise the requirements, you're able to screen out a lot of unqualified people, but you still may be screening out some qualified people that are in the mix. But this is an overall trend. There's a list of several hundred jobs I can share with you of job requirements that have been increased. But that's one change that's definitely happening. When you get to how do you identify those people at the bottom that you're interested in assessing, when I say the bottom of that funnel, personality testing has certainly been on the rise. It's a fast-growing industry. Certainly I'm pleased to be part of it, but I shared this with David too. The only reason that anybody contacts us and the only reason our business grows is when the economy is improving and more people are hiring and they want to do better diligence in making sure that they have the right fit. Personality testing has been on the rise. If it's any indication, and hopefully this is a trend that will continue, our business just in the first 6 weeks of this year is up over 125%. And last year was our best year we ever had, and prior in the year, and it's better than the year before. So our business continues to grow because more and more companies, especially small businesses, are interested in testing. But personality is just one part of the bigger picture. And we try to put this in the context of competencies, and we'll talk more about what that means. But personality, just because somebody has the right personality fit, isn't necessarily that it isn't the only thing that they need to be qualified. They certainly need some skills and experience or some training behind that. But even that alone is sometimes not enough. And then it's important to be able to integrate how does that personality affect their performance on the job. And that's what our business is and our expertise. And overall, ultimately what you're trying to measure is soft skills and, how do they, are they motivated to do the job for you? Do they fit in your culture? How will they collaborate? What's their critical thinking skills like? And so forth. So that's what our expertise is in helping to assess that. So kind of an overview of the approach, and not only our approach, but an approach you should be taking, is this is about data. Just like you forecast and budget and analyze your market and your competitors and your sales flow, your supply chain, you really need to start looking at human resources, at the people who work for you or want to work for you from data. And pre-employment testing, which includes personality, but it's also attitude testing and general reasoning testing or cognitive skill testing, motivational skills. All this data can be put into a form that you can make much more accurate predictions of who might be successful not only in the job that you have to offer, but within your culture. It also has to be put in the right context, and that's what competencies help us do. And again, I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. Whatever model you use, whatever tools or assessments or interview questions you use, the whole process the hiring model has to be practical, it has to be usable, and it has to be flexible. If you worked on this last year, it may need to be modified. If you worked on it 10 years ago or don't have one, you absolutely need one, because that, again, it's a necessity in today's market that you have a better process. It doesn't have to be, it can be simple but sophisticated. And working with small businesses, many don't even have an HR person. Hiring is done on the fly. Assessments and technology can definitely help. The assessments are the beginning, not the end of the destination. We're certainly going to talk about that. The focus always has to be on linking the job fit to the business results. Unfortunately, I hear too often people selecting an assessment, or they call me and ask for, we're looking for somebody who's really good with people. They're really outgoing. And that may be important, but there's other skills relating to being outgoing. Or being extroverted. Just being extroverted is not enough. Just being outgoing is not enough. If it was, then every extrovert or outgoing person should be great at sales. We know that's not the case, that there are some introverts and shy and reserved people who are good with sales. And there's many extroverts that are not very good with sales. And the same as somebody that likes analysis and likes data. If it was easy to find that introverted analytical person, means they'd be a great accountant, engineer, auditor. We know that's not to be true. There's a lot of other components that go into that. So one is finding an approach and finding the traits, skills, abilities, values that help link job fit to a business result. But once you do that, you have a model that provides a blueprint, and ultimately you're connecting again the qualities of an individual to the outcomes. Okay. So if we start looking at assessments of different selection strategies, and when you'll see in a second when I come up with assessments, we're talking about everything from the application process to your interview, to your phone screen, to the different types of testing you use, your reference checks. All of that falls under the umbrella of assessments. And there's two approaches you can take, two strategies. One is having a process to quickly identify the people who you shouldn't invest in any further. It's not that they're not good people, but they just may not fit. They may not have the minimum qualifications. That's an easy one. But what if they have the right qualifications, but they really aren't going to fit in with the culture or that department or that manager, or they're not ready to grow. They're not really ready to relocate. So there's a lot of factors that you can use, a lot of different assessments that you can use to screen out the high-risk candidates. And then there's also the other process is selecting in. And selecting in is saying, we have a set criteria. We know we're looking for people with analytical skills. They're collaborative. They're good at teamwork. And they can negotiate, or they're innovative and creative, whatever those skills might be for you. That it's critical that if they don't have that skill, that they have a high potential to earn that and to learn that. So we talk about all the assessment systems that are out there, of dividing them into two piles, if you will. One is which ones are really good at screening out and which ones are good at selecting in. I mentioned this earlier. This comes from not me, but the Department of Labor. Of what do they consider an assessment? And this is important when you look at validity and reliability, because all of these are held to a standard that they can't discriminate. They have to be job related. If you observe somebody that they have tattoos and pierced earrings, piercing, not just pierced ears, but piercings all over, that may repulse you. That may be something that you don't personally like, but you as an employer need to determine that that's not disqualifying otherwise qualified people. And so even observation is held to the same standard as personality testing and honesty and integrity testing. So we work with you to help remain compliant, but we already recognize that there's a lot of personal bias, involved. In partnership with GEA, with Georgia Employers Association, we offer a number of different assessments. We've talked about PeopleClues at the last webinar, and we're going to talk I'll talk very, very briefly about that in a second. We're going to spend most of our time with ASSESS, but by looking at ASSESS, which is our most sophisticated tool, you're going to see what is possible to evaluate people, what's available. And from that, you may say, we don't need all that. We need something less, or we need something different. But it'll give you a good baseline. Preview is kind of a middle of the road between PeopleClues, which is a screening tool. Assess is a select-in tool. Preview is probably in the middle. We also use DISC. If you're not familiar with that acronym, it's similar to Myers-Briggs. We have a motivators tool. We actually have two motivators tool. We have the business motivators and quality of motivation. This is really a values tool. It says, what does the individual value? It's an easy 10-minute assessment, but it says, what does that individual value? And if you can provide that, such as they value learning, or they value a career, or they value working for on behalf of other people, community. They'd enjoy working for a family-owned business rather than a private equity type of a company. We can find out that they fit in the culture very easily. eSkills is our skill testing. It's software testing, data entry, math, and so forth. Creatrix is an innovation tool, is looking at how innovative people are. Quality motivation is probably our most sophisticated tool, primarily used for development. And that's a whole other story, but anybody's interested, about motivation tools, we can talk. We also have a number of 360s. Real quickly, what PeopleClues does, and again, this is a screening out tool. This will quickly identify people at high risk. There's multiple assessments. The two most commonly used one in PeopleClues is attitude and personality. We look for hostility, which is frustration tolerance, is what's a candidate's attitude toward working with other people, both internal customers, their coworkers, and external customers. Conscientiousness, are they dependable? Will they show up? Will they show up on time? Will they follow your rules? Integrity is honesty. Those are the three core scales. And also, we can test for computer misuse. Are they going to spend all day long on their mobile devices? Are they going to use your PC? The desk computer for eBay, running their eBay business. Sexual harassment, it looks at their attitude toward telling dirty jokes and internal dating and so forth. And then there's always a distortion scale, which is called good impression. Good impression scale is very important because it answers the one question is, how do I know that this person didn't lie on the assessment? And it's a very sophisticated algorithm that can say the results are too good to be true. You either have to retest them or ask them, go in more depth with their interview. Under personality, it looks at team orientation, again, conscientiousness, detail orientation, extroversion, stability, coping skills, how do they deal with stress, how direct and tough-minded are they. There's a general reasoning option. This is a quick 7-minute timed assessment looking at how how quickly people can learn and process new information. If the job is constantly changing, you need people who can learn quickly, whether it's changes in software or multitasking. You need people that at least have average to above average general reasoning skills. Sometimes people have a great personality. They do everything right, but they just can't keep up with the speed of work and the scope of work. And general reasoning will help you define that. And then, again, good impression scale is how do we know that they didn't lie when they took this? And that, again, a sophisticated algorithm. Every one of our hiring tools has, they call them by different names, but they have what we call the distortion scale. Okay. So I mentioned several times about competency. we try to put in, when you're looking, whatever assessment you use, and when I say that, it's even your interview, or your reference check, or your job application, it is putting them in the context of a competency. And a competency is a cluster, or the combination of both innate and learned characteristics. So if you look at this graph, is that people have their DNA. Again, they have that personality, they have that bent, they have a motivation, they have an IQ, not that we're measuring IQ, but they have an aptitude, an intellectual aptitude toward doing certain jobs, and that fit in some better than others. There's certain personal characteristics they have. There's also knowledge and experience compensates for a little bit of this. So if I'm not naturally good at details or organization or even math or writing skills, I can learn the skills to compensate for that. So sometimes you can find somebody on a personality who says they're not very detailed and organized, yet you know them personally, and they are the most organized person in the world, and they dot the I's, cross the T's. But that's a conscious effort. That's something they learn. That's not innate. So that is important in developing competencies. It's a combination of both. And then there's also the additional skills and training that they have. The combination of both this innate and learned traits, characteristics, forms the competency. So when we talk about competencies, we're looking at who are naturals at it and who have learned. And how do we know? If you're hiring somebody or promoting something into a new position, it's very, very important to look at their potential, because they may not have this training. You may be looking to hire somebody or put somebody to even an apprentice program and identify who's the most likely to succeed if we provide them the experience and the right training. So again, competencies can be used in many different ways, but we try to put all of this into a competency background. And the reason why competencies are important is competencies dictate behaviors. And what we're trying to control in the environment is find out who are the people who are going to behave in a way that are going to have the most effective outcomes. So if we start at the end and say, here's the end result we want, here's the behaviors we want to demonstrate, which typically comes out in job descriptions, well-written job descriptions. Many of them are not well-written. And that's our approach. We start to say, what are you wanting to accomplish? How fast do you want to grow? What are you trying to sell? What's this person's responsibilities? How are you going to measure their success? What are their outcomes? What are the behaviors that are necessary to fulfill those outcomes? And then you can select competencies that will drive those behaviors. So that's basically our approach, and the approach that EEOC and Department of Labor and every company that's been successful at doing this. Okay, just a different way of looking at this. Again, this shows their potential. This shows their behaviors. So let's take a look at what a tool like ASSESS can measure. I'm very familiar with the competition that's out there. There's literally hundreds of tools like this, and there's 30,000 plus tests that can be used in the workplace. But there's a handful that are pretty well recognized, have been well validated, highly reliable, very predictive, good business orientation. And one of those is ASSESS. The reason that I prefer ASSESS over many of the other ones happens to be because of these top scales. This is one of the few assessments that is available out there that really looks at critical thinking skills. How does somebody make a decision? How do they solve problems? Because they have a good track record in the past doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be that they can use those same skills in the future, especially if looking at this first scale here is a need to probe. If they're not curious, if they don't ask a lot of questions, if they take things at face value, if they assume that the future is going to be just a replicate of the past, they're going to get burnt. They may have been able to do what they did in the past, but because the environment and the competition and the materials and the products and the services and everything else changes so much, you have to have people that at least have a minimum amount of curiosity. Other people are very impulsive when they make decisions, and they may have been rewarded and successful because they got things done because they took that initiative and they just did it. But you also know people who have made pretty rushed decisions or impulsive decisions or based totally on their gut, who have eventually got burnt. And the more complex world we live in and the more volatile it is and the more ambiguous things are and the more costly a mistake is, you have to have people that have the right mix of critical thinking components. And ASSESS does a better job of this than any other tool I've seen in the market. But thinking is not the only part of doing a job. And you need people who can execute. So we're all familiar with people who, employers or colleagues or probably family members and spouses who do a lot of thinking and they do all the analysis, but they don't seem to get anything done. And so we look extensively at these 10 traits that look at, do they have the energy to get the job done? Are they multitasking? Do they have a tendency to bring closure to get results? How resilient are they? How detail-oriented are they? How organized are they? So there's a mix of these components that fit into that. And then under relating, it's how do they relate with other people? Certainly, we all know people who are great thinkers and work hard, and they've got a great work ethic, but they just have horrible relationship skills. And again, collaboration, especially as we outsource more jobs, have multiple teams, have fluid work teams, that's becoming much more important. And one of the most important traits that we've identified happens to be this criticism tolerance and self-control, which is if you give someone feedback, if they get rejected, someone tells them no, if you don't agree with what they said with you in the first place, do they take it personally? And we all know people who everything that every move we make, they seem to take as personal affront. And then the self-control is how do we deal with it internally. So it looks at 25 different traits. The critical thinking is a differentiator, I believe, with ASSESS versus other tools. But any position that you have, whether it's an executive assistant, whether it's your mechanic, whether it's your CEO, if the job requires some good decision-making skills, and this is an excellent way of identifying how they go about doing it and what that approach is. It looks at work execution and work ethic, and it also looks at communication. Like the other tools, it has a positive response factor, which is that distortion scale or good impression scale. Again, this one's, because there's so many scales, there's actually two of them that are revealed. The only time these will get revealed on the ASSESS report, by the way, is when somebody flags this. It's not on every report, which means that the reports are not distorted. Let me just take a break there, David. And I don't know if there's been any questions that have come in.
So far, we don't have any questions, but this may not be a question regarding ASSESS, the personality competency linkage, that particular slide you've got up right now, but it has to do with workplace violence. Is there anything that you have any tool that measures workplace violence or bullying?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, that's a great question here, and let's show you. So if I see somebody who's, let's take some of these scales, and we'll show you how we combine these to determine that. And again, this would be more for, you're not going to use ASSESS on hourly workers or the non-exempt workers. But if you were looking at this at a higher level, we would look at the assertiveness. And if you're at the highest end of assertiveness, it means that you're more direct. You're going to say what needs to be said regardless of the circumstance. So that would be one thing. If you have a low need to be liked, you may not care what you say. So again, work violence can also be verbal abuse or a hostile environment. So
sure.
So in somebody like that, we might have an indication that this person might speak out and confront people. But when you get down to criticism tolerance, is how likely is it, what's going to set them off? Is that there things that other people are going to say that they're just very, very thin-skinned? So if you see low criticism tolerance, you have somebody that, at least personally, doesn't have good coping skills. And then self-control is very low. So if I would see somebody that would have very high assertive, very low need to be liked, very low criticism tolerance, very low self-control, does it mean they're going to be violent? Well, they're either going to be violent or cry. And we get into behaviors a little bit that, for anybody who's familiar with the DISC model or a model like that, is if someone's a high D, it means they have a short fuse. So if they have a short fuse, and on top of that combination that I just gave you, there are people who are likely to get angry very quickly. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to be violent, but they do have a short fuse. If they're high I's, they tend to go into talking mode. If they're high S's, they tend to break down and cry. Those are the people who retreat to the closet or close their doors and their eyes well up. And if they're high C's, they get very, very defensive. So we can identify not only people who are at risk for that, but then what would be signs of their behavior that would come out? And there's a few other things, but very briefly, yeah, you can look at people who have not necessarily a propensity to have workplace violence because there's some psychological issues there, and we can't test for those, but who has a tendency to maybe have a short fuse. But if I go back here a few slides and we go back to assess, or the PeopleClues, hostility is a factor. So if somebody has a high-risk attitude toward hostility, they've admitted to getting angry. They've admitted to even having felt like hitting someone at work. And oddly enough, people will admit to that, but they do. If they have high hostility, if they're high risk for conscientiousness, if they have low, again, the low self-control over here, if they have if they're not team-oriented but highly competitive, individualistic, if they're very minded, it's skewing the risk to that side. And you have to be fair to them. It just may mean that their personality's ripe for being angry or crying, whichever the case may be. But it certainly exposes the risk. And studies that have been done do indicate that it's very unlikely to have people who don't have those profiles to turn to have a violent act in the workplace unless there's some psychological component to it. So yeah, there's legal and easy ways to identify people that are at risk. So,
okay, thank you.
Yeah, but great question. And that's, again, when going back to my initial concept of if you put it in the context, you go, what do you want to measure? And if that's something you want to measure, then there are assessments that are available to do that. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if we go back to our competencies here, looking at personality traits is one component, and it's fine, but the tendency is for people to pull out traits. We need somebody who's outgoing and assertive and resilient, and that's all fine and good. But putting it into the workplace is, okay, how does that relate? If you're looking for people who can drive for results, and we see this often in ads and competency lists, we need people who can get results. Great. There are certain personality traits that have been validated to be predictive of people who are naturals at getting results. So one would be, having a level of assertiveness. It could be high, but there are, if it's too low, they may be at risk for doing that because they just don't speak up. How reliant are they on others or self-reliant? Do they have the energy to get the work done? How practical or realistic are they? Do they have the resilience when things don't go right? So what's happened is through extensive studies, and there's hundreds of thousands of people that have been worked through the Digby system. They're the organizational psychologists that developed and can constantly validate this. They've been able to identify these 5 traits. It's not that other ones don't matter, but these are the most relevant. And then they've been able to benchmark it against top performers. And the green areas indicate other people who have been successful. And we have competency models for executive management, supervisor, key individuals, engineers, technology, sales managers in sales. And then we can also, if you have a competency model or you want us to help you develop them, we can customize that too. But regardless of which position or which role, we found that there were 5 personality traits that were highly indicative of people who would be successful in getting results. That same priority, and again, if you look here where they come from, in getting results, there is one thinking scale. there are 3 working scales. There's 1 relating scale. So it's a combination of everything. It's not that just somebody has good relating skills. They actually need strong working skills. But if they don't have good thinking skill, they may not get the results you want. So it's looking at the whole person. Interpersonal communication. There's only 3 scales that they've been able to validate as predictive. Interpersonal communication is so variable. It's kind of wide open, and people think it's very easy to predict, but there's a lot of variations. But there are 3 that tend to be pretty good indicators. But if you look, the ranges are pretty high. So although interpersonal communication is important, it's not necessarily always the best predictor of work. We also get into safety, and I know especially in manufacturing, and you have insurance client members, and we work with insurance companies, we work with risk management, we work with safety. Again, there are some traits that just plain out can identify people at high risk. These areas in the red are the lowest performers. They're the highest risk performers, and there's a 1 out of, it's somewhere between 1 out of 10 and 1 out of 5, kind of in that 10 to 20% success rate, which means 1 out of 5 of people who have that behavior make it, but 90% don't. So again, not that 1 trait's going to knock somebody out, but if you have 2 or 3 areas in the red, it's very high risk for those particular areas. We also have a way to compare them as a pool, and so if you look here, their safety profile was an 83% match. Against continuous improvement, it was 100% match. Innovation, 100% match. And this isn't the same person, by the way. This is a slightly different grid. Delivering results was a 90% match. The person we looked at was probably about a 50% match, as they fell off the grid in a couple areas. So you can get this profile match as well. Most of our clients are just using these, and they look for how many yellow and red areas does the candidate or did that employee fall in. Now, the good news about it is, if I go back here just a second, sorry for all the slide movement. If we go back here, and let's say you have an existing employee, and you find that they are a little bit impulsive, and that's what that means if they're down in this area, and maybe they don't dot the I's and cross the T's. If they are looking for career development, or you are looking to promote them, or they're already in the position and having problems in the position, you can use these assessments for development, and you can identify certain skills and traits and behaviors that they need to change and work on. So it's not just random that, hey, you need to improve, but you have to improve in these specific areas. It doesn't change their personality. This isn't something you give them a year later and hope that the score changes. But based on their performance reviews or 360 or just their overall performance outcomes, you're able to help people compensate for areas that they naturally lack. Okay. Kind of a review of ASSESS. Again, it has this thinking component, which is, I believe, not only unique, but it's the best compared to a lot of the other tools that are out there. It looks at how you think, how do you go about implementation, execution, and how do you relate with others. There's 9 standard competency models. These 6 are currently built for selection only. If you look at development, we also have 3 additional ones, and the most popular one we have is this leading others. It's quite comprehensive, and it's excellent for identifying and building the skills for leadership training and leadership development. Or we can create a custom competency. We've done that for engineers, accountants, technology, executive assistant. We have quite a few that we've built, and we're happy to share those with you. This is just a repeat of what we talked about for those. It is available in 17 different languages if that's a key there. I'm going to talk about the validation in just a second. If you want to even add another layer to this, we use another tool for a real in-depth look at critical thinking, at not do they have the critical thinking abilities, but how quickly they can apply those. And because in certain industries, in certain jobs, in certain roles, again, we're living in a volatile, complex, ambiguous, uncertain world, and sometimes you need people who can think on their feet. And people who are down here have a tough time kind of dealing with all the flood of information that comes in. People over here are just very adept at doing that. They can process a lot of new information on the fly. And again, it's important to find out for the role what the relevance is. People who have too high a general abilities, which people always are impressed with people who can think quickly. The problem with that is they often get bored in the job. So hiring too high a skills for a job that's routine is a primary reason for turnover. Okay. I mentioned earlier that this can be used for feedback. We have two different types of hiring reports, but they do provide, in addition to these benchmarks, what it means. The reports do not require a lot of training. We do provide support, unlimited support. Happy to email, phone, web, however we need to do it. But the reports are really written for the end user, and they're pretty transparent. But they also provide interview questions. If someone falls off the mark on these safety scales, what should you ask them? And so it helps you create a behavioral structural interview. They can be used for development. In the development reports, we don't show the yellow and the red. It's just the green and the white. Gives you the similar comments of how an individual would do the job in areas that they might need improvement. And there's a 360 type of report too if you want to do that. But in the development report, instead of giving interview questions, it actually gives a list of recommendations of skill training, of books they can read, online courses, multimedia, that they can take, audio, podcasts that they can listen to. So the reports are quite extensive. The reports range from 30 pages to 80 pages. 80 pages means somebody has a lot of development work to be done. And then, as I said, you're not going to change their personality, but if you identified somebody in a leadership development program, or even you hired somebody and recognized right up front that there were areas that they were need to improve, you can put them, you can do a full 360 or you can do a focused 360, which means that you just identify 2 or 3 key areas that you want to monitor. Much easier to do 360s for anybody who may be a whole other webinar discussion, but 360s for anybody who's done them. There are cautions, there are certain implications, you have to do them correctly. They're very, very effective. It's an incredible tool, but there's a lot of margin for error and there's a lot of risks involved with it if not done well. But the ASSESS system actually includes that. Most of our clients are just using the hiring and the development tool, though. We also provide a list of resources. There's access for the manager to go on and get tips of how to best manage and interview and hire and develop this person. And then there's also an employee resource that shows them how to use the reports and set goals. There's worksheets. There's action planning formats. So in summary, the ASSESS system is a hire to retire system of how do you select the right people, how do you screen them, how do you select in the right people, how do you manage their performance, and how do you manage their careers. One final thing, and then we'll open it up for questions here. There are risks with every type of assessment, whether it's an interview, if you use the wrong application, if you ask the wrong questions, if the person who's reviewing the application looks at it incorrectly. There's lots of risks due to subjectivity. And then there's things to avoid. Likewise, with using a personality or a cognitive testing or an attitude testing, used improperly, or if you use the wrong assessment or used improperly, there are risks. However, the case law is generally because of 2 reasons. The cases that are always cited of why you can't use an assessment are primarily 2 reasons. One is that they were used incorrectly. It was the wrong test for the wrong job or the wrong test for the wrong skill. The other was it was used unfairly, that you used it on certain populations and not others. So you use it on you don't use it on someone who's referred to you by a friend or a relative, but you do use it on minorities. That's just not the fair process. Not almost, every case law that I'm aware of, and I do follow this closely as well as our publishers because it's our living, have been due to the wrong test at the wrong time, or it was used unfairly. Any assessment that we're using for hiring is validated. They're strong technical manuals. They're reliable, meaning that the results are repeated over and over and over again. There's low adverse impact. They are job-related. Again, one of the reasons that people have been sued is they've used clinical-oriented assessments. Even though they're accurate and they're validated, they use clinically-oriented assessments in the workplace. And the Dayton-Hudson case that's often cited, the Renner Center case that's often cited for discrimination was primarily due to that they were using a clinical-oriented assessment. Our assessments are all business-oriented. They're from the ground up. They're based on the 5-factor model, which even the Department of Labor and EEOC says is a compliant model. It doesn't endorse an assessment, but it says it's a compliant model to use. And most importantly is use it consistently. If you're going to test one person, you got to test them all. If you're going to if you test people at the end stage, then that's okay, meaning that, hey, we're only going to test the second or third final candidates. That's okay. You have 3 candidates, you have to test all 3. You can't test one. If you want to test from the beginning, then everybody has an opportunity to test. So it's not that you have to test. If you use it, testing at all, you have to use it on every applicant. You need to decide where in the process you will use any type of assessment, and then you have to use it consistently. So the consistent and fairness generally takes care of any risks. And in 20 years of doing this, none of the publishers we work with, none of the psychologists we work with, and us personally as a company have never have even come close to being sued. We haven't even had anything thrown out. So it's what we do every day, and you know, the risks are. There are risks. I'll be the first to tell you that there's not. I won't be the first to tell you that they don't exist, but they are. The risks are nominal compared to the risks of hiring the wrong person. And going back to that question David said of even hiring somebody who's at risk for violence. So let me stop there, David. I don't know if there's any other questions, or we can open up the floor.
So far we don't. So far we don't have any questions. I did have one question, though. Can you talk a little bit about the offer that you made in the last webinar regarding having doing an assessment without charge?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. You know, to get your feet wet, it's a little bit more challenging because the assessment takes a little bit more time. But with either PeopleClues or ASSESS, if there's somebody that has a candidate, internally or externally, we would be happy to assess them for you to put your toe in the water or get your feet wet, however we want to look at it, to see if it might be something that you'd want to use. So, you know, if there's a situation that you're considering using this, if you're currently looking at hiring somebody, we'd be happy to help you with that. Again, provide an assessment for that first candidate, or if there's somebody internally, or even if you want to evaluate yourself and see if it might be a good fit. So all you need to do is contact us, and happy to talk about it.
Okay. We will have this. We are recording this webinar. We'll have it. I can send you a link, and also I can send you the slides that Ira's used today. So unless we have any more questions, Ira, I think we've come to a conclusion. Did you have anything else for us?
Yeah, I just up on the slide that's up right now is, and you can just go to my website and click on it, which is successperformancesolutions.com. It'll be in your slide program as well. In this month's issue of Inc. magazine, we were honored and privileged to be part of an article in there. I was interviewed for it about personality testing. There were 3 of our clients that were interviewed. 2 of them, all 3 actually use PeopleClues. One of them uses ASSESS, and that one happened to is the VP of HR at a small manufacturing company, less than 100 employees, and he's actually brought me into 3 different companies over the 12 years that I've worked with him. So that's always a good, when people ask for testimonies or, anybody else used it, when somebody carries you from company to company, that's pretty good. And just some information, and again, if anybody's interested in a sample or a demo, happy to talk to you, no obligation.
Great, thank you, Ira. Once again, do we have any questions? Okay, don't see any questions. I'll be glad to unmute your line if you like, if you want to ask it verbally, or you can type it in. I don't see any questions. By the way, Ira's got his contact information there. My information is David Whitaker, David at GeorgiaEmployers.org. I think you probably know that already, but there it is if you need it. So anyway, Ira, great job, and we will have this webinar posted on our website for you to, if you have anybody else you'd like to see and hear it. So without anything, thanks a lot, Ira. Appreciate your time. Good job.
Yeah, thanks everybody for participating today. Appreciate it. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.